Hi, this is Jake for BandLab, and in this video, we're going to take a look at how you can enhance instrument sounds with effects in BandLab. You can open this project yourself with the link in the video description. And if you find this guide useful, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to be the first to know when new videos drop. BandLab has a wide variety of instrument sounds to use, and you can increase your sonic palette even further by using them in conjunction with BandLab's effects. Let's make a quick 80s style beat using some process instrument sounds. I'm going to keep the default project tempo of 120 BPM and set the project key to F minor. First, I want a drum part. I create a new instrument track and set the instrument to drum pads Prince kit. I compose a rhythm with kicks on each beat and close hats between the beats. I duplicate this bar out for the rest of the 4-bar clip. To duplicate notes or clips in BandLab, hold Option on Mac or Alt on Windows and drag them over. I set this track's volume to -6 dB to give me more headroom to add other elements to the mix. You'll notice that this drum part is really simple. That's because I'm going to add a snare on a different track so that I can put effects on the snare and keep the other drum sounds unprocessed. I add another instrument track and again set it to drum pads Prince kit. I sequence snares on the second and fourth beat. I duplicate this bar out for the rest of the clip. To give this snare a classic 80s sound, I'm going to add some effects. I can bring up the effects panel by clicking the effects button at the bottom of the screen, or by clicking the effects button on the track itself. I click the Add Effect button and select a reverb, Space Maker effect. I set the model to large hall and the mix to 32%. This gives the snare a long reverb tail. I'd like to tighten up this tail, so next I add a dynamics noise gate. This effect silences the signal once its volume has dropped below a certain threshold. I set the threshold to -19.5 dB. Now when the snare plays, we get a brief burst of the big reverb sound, which is quickly silenced. This gives us a big snare sound that's still tight and punchy. I set the snare track to -6 dB to balance it with the other drum sounds. Next, I'd like to add a bass sound. I'd like an aggressive sounding sawtooth style bass sound, and I'm going to use one of BandLab's lead synths to create it. Add a new instrument track and set it to leads G-Funk Saw. I program a tight sequence that plays F on 8th notes, followed by F an octave up also on 8th notes. This plays for the whole clip, dropping down to E flat for the 3rd bar, and the first half of the 4th bar. Currently, the sound has a lot of energy in the mids and the highs, but I want to mellow that out to give me more space for other elements. So in the effects panel, I add a tone multi-filter effect. By default, this is set to low pass mode, which means that it cuts out high frequencies, leaving the lower frequencies. The frequency where this cut begins is controlled by the frequency knob. I set it to 756 Hz, which leaves the lows and some of the mids intact, so that this bass can keep driving the track. I'd like this bass to have some organic style movement to it, so I also add a modulation stereo chorus, which I leave with the default settings. This gives the sound a textural movement and also increases its stereo width. I set this track to -6 dB too. Now I'd like to add some chords. Add a new instrument track and set this one to pads, Retro Juno pad. I sequence a chord progression that plays F minor, E flat major, and D flat major. This sound is currently very upfront, and I'd like to move it more to the sides of the mix and further back, leaving room for the other sounds to take center stage. Add a modulation, phase 72 effect, setting the speed to 0.3. Like the stereo chorus, this enhances the stereo width of the sound and adds a textural moment, though this movement is slower than the chorus effects, which works well with the longer notes played by the pad instrument. I also add a reverb, studio reverb. I set the size to 23% to make the effect a touch smaller sounding. I set this track to -6 dB as well. The last track I'm going to add is a lead. I set an instrument track to leads, G-funk sine. I program a simple ostinato that plays F, A flat, B flat, and C. The fourth time around, the final note switches back to an F. This sound is harmonically very simple, and I'd like to add some harmonic interest with some distortion. I add a distortion mouse pro effect, then set the distortion and filter to 10. This adds sawtooth style harmonics, giving the sound more bite. To help the sound fit into the mix, I add a studio reverb, again setting the size to 23%. This helps it sound like it's in the same space as the other sounds. I set the track to -7.8 dB. Now we've got an atmospheric 80s style mix. Let's compare the process tracks with the original versions to hear how they've changed. You could fork this project and make your own version of it using the video in the link description. Have fun!